Naira couldn't bear the blood trail of her clan any longer. When her father, the Orc Lord, demanded her children be raised for war, she chose to run. In a desperate act, she shoved the little ones into a stranger's arms and bolted into the woods as bait. But did she truly lead them astray? The wooden fence was wet with morning dew when Naira crossed it at a dead run. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her lungs burned. Her emerald-green skin shimmered with sweat under the pale early light, and the two boys could barely keep pace with her long strides through the mud. Gromak, the older one, gripped his brother's hand hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Drogal cried without making a sound, as if he already understood that silence was the price of survival. The farmhouse appeared between the trees like a brown shadow, small, solid. An oil lamp still burning in the window, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin, straight line. Someone was home. Naira didn't know the man who lived there. She only knew he was old, that he had fought in the border wars, and that travellers who passed through said he had honour. Not the kind of honour that was performed for audiences, the quiet kind, the kind that cost something. That was enough. She hit the door with her fist 3 times. Hard. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. The door swung open. A man stood in the frame, broad-shouldered, his weathered face carved by decades of wind and hardship. Deep lines around his eyes, hands calloused from work that had never stopped. He still held an iron mug, steam rising from whatever was inside. He looked at Naira. He looked at the 2 small boys clinging to her sides. His expression didn't change. That steadiness was the only thing that kept Naira from turning and running. She grabbed Gromak and Drogal by the shoulders and pushed them forward, into the man's arms, without ceremony, without gentleness, because there was no time for either. "They're coming after me," she said, her voice low and cracked. "Protect my children." And before the man could answer, before he could even set down the mug, Naira was already gone. She turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, back toward the tree line, her boots throwing mud behind her with every stride. She moved fast, deliberately, making noise where a fleeing person would try to be silent, snapping branches, letting her footsteps land hard on the wet ground, because that was the plan. She was the bait. She was buying them time with the only thing she had left to spend. The man stood in the doorway holding 2 small orc children he had never seen before, watching a woman disappear into the forest like smoke swallowed by morning. His name was Varric, and for 1 full second he was completely still. He had seen orcs in battle, too many of them across too many years. He had fought alongside some and against others, and he had buried men on both sides of that line. But he had never seen an orc like this, small, frightened, with eyes that asked for something no sword had ever been able to give, and no peace treaty had ever managed to deliver. Gromak looked up at him with those wide, dark eyes and didn't speak. His jaw was set in a way that was too old for his face. Drogal had stopped crying, his little chest still hitching with the last of his silent sobs, his small fist clutching the back of his brother's shirt. Varric set the iron mug down on the floor, just inside the door. He put 1 large hand on each boy's back and pulled them gently inside. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind them. Outside, somewhere in the direction Naira had run, the ground began to tremble. Varric heard it before he saw it. A low, rhythmic vibration, moving through the floorboards first, then up through the soles of his boots, then spreading into his chest like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to him. He set down the canteen he'd been reaching for and crossed to the window. He pulled the curtain back 1 inch and looked through the gap. 3 riders, massive, mounted on beasts that were nothing like horses. Their hides were thick and grey, their heads broad and low, and the horns that curved from their skulls were long enough to split a cart in half. The celestial rhinoceroses. He had heard stories about them in the years after the war, sitting around fires with men who had fought on the frontier. He had not believed all of what they said. He believed it now. The one riding in front carried himself with the posture of a man who had never once questioned his own authority. His orc features were angular and cold, his eyes moving across the property in slow, methodical sweeps, the way a hunter looks at a field before stepping into it. Behind him rode two scouts, broader and quieter, their hands already resting on the hilts of their bone-forged blades. Not casual. Ready. Varric let the curtain fall back into place. He turned. The boys were standing in the middle of the room, watching him. They hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. Gromac's hand was around Drogal's wrist. "Come," Varric said. He moved quickly, pulling them through the back hallway and into the bedroom. He dropped to one knee beside the bed and pressed his fingers into a groove in the floorboard that most people would never notice was there. He lifted the hatch. A square of darkness opened in the floor, exhaling cold, damp air that smelled of soil and old wood. He had dug that hole himself in the second year of the war, when hiding had become as important a skill as fighting. "Get in," he said. "Both of you. Sit down and don't move." Gromac climbed down first, no hesitation, lowering himself into the dark with a steadiness that made Varric's chest tighten. He reached up and helped Drogal down after him. The smaller boy's feet found the floor, and he looked up at Varric through the opening with an expression that sat somewhere between trust and terror. Varric reached above the window for the bundle of dried herbs hanging from a nail. He'd kept them out of habit more than anything, the way soldiers keep things long after the war ends, because getting rid of them feels like admitting something. He crouched over the hatch and rubbed the herbs firmly over both boys, their arms, their necks, their hair, the backs of their hands. "The smell," he said simply. "Orc trackers will find you through the floorboards if I don't cover it." Gromac nodded once, precisely, like a soldier acknowledging an order. The gesture was so controlled, so practiced, that Varric had to look away for a moment before lowering the hatch. The boys disappeared into the dark. He stood, straightened his coat, ran his thumb once along the grip of the revolver at his hip. Then he walked back through the house, opened the front door, and stepped out onto the porch. 3 orcs on massive beasts were already at his fence. Varric leaned against the porch post and crossed his arms, the way a man stands when he has been interrupted doing something ordinary and is mildly inconvenienced by it. The general brought his beast to a stop just short of the fence line. The animal's breath came in great white clouds in the cold morning air. The general looked down at Varric with the particular contempt of someone who has never needed to doubt himself, cold and impersonal, the way a boot regards mud. "The fugitive orc," the general said. His voice was deep and measured, each word placed with the precision of a man who never repeated himself. "And her heirs. Where are they?" Varric said nothing for a moment. He held the general's gaze the way a man holds a fence post in a storm. Not fighting it, just not moving. "Humans don't involve themselves in clan matters," the general said. "Saw a woman running north," Varric said. He nodded toward the tree line. "Hour ago, maybe more. Moving fast. Didn't stop to talk." The general studied him. Behind him, the 2 scouts had their hands resting on the hilts of their blades, not drawing, just touching. It was a very specific kind of reminder. The silence between them stretched and stretched, and then it came, from inside the house, muffled, small, so quiet that on any other morning, in any other moment, it would have been nothing. A sneeze. The general's pointed ears moved forward with the involuntary precision of an animal's. His eyes left Varric's face and travelled slowly to the front door, deliberate as the minute hand of a clock. "What?" he said very quietly. "Was that?" The scout on the left shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet. The one on the right angled his beast a half-step sideways, putting himself in line with the door. Inside the house, behind the closed bedroom door, under the floorboards, Varric imagined Drogal pressing both hands over his own mouth in the dark. Varric didn't move. He had learned stillness in the war the way other men learned to read, out of pure necessity. letter by letter until it became second nature. He let nothing reach his face. He let nothing reach his hands. He exhaled a quiet breath that came out almost like amusement. "That's my dog," he said. "Cold like this. He won't leave the hearth. Spends the whole morning snuffling around the fire." He lifted one hand from his arm and gestured casually toward the interior. "You're welcome to come in and take a look." That was the bluff. The whole thing rested on it, because a guilty man does not issue that invitation. The general held his gaze, 5 seconds, 10, long enough that Varric could hear the blood moving in his own ears. Then the general pulled the reins. "The river," he said to his men, his voice flat and final. "Her trail runs north. We follow the main track." He didn't look at Varric again. The 3 riders turned and moved away from the fence in a single file, the great grey beasts carrying them across the field and into the grey morning, until the vibration of their hooves faded out of the earth and out of the wood and out of Varric's chest. He waited until there was nothing left to hear. Then he let the air out of his lungs slowly, pressed one hand flat against the porch post, and went back inside. He crossed the room and lifted the hatch. 2 faces looked up at him from the dark below. Drogel's eyes were enormous. His hands were still pressed over his mouth. "Stay here," Varric said. "Don't open this until I come back." He paused. "I'm going to get your mother." He went next door first. Valora's farm sat 200 meters east through a stand of birch trees, close enough to see the smoke from her chimney on still mornings. She had been there since before the war, had watched the border change hands twice, and had the kind of practical calm that comes from having survived things that should have broken her. She opened the door before he finished knocking. He told her in under a minute. She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady on his face, reading the parts he wasn't saying out loud. "The boys are under my bed," he said. "Hatch in the floor, second board from the left. They're scared, but they're holding. There's water under there in the clay jar." Valora looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression, not quite reluctance, but the weight of a person deciding something quickly. Then she reached up and took her shawl from the hook beside the door. "Go," she said. He was saddled and riding north 6 minutes later. White horse, long stride. The kind of animal that didn't need to be pushed because it understood urgency from the way a rider sat. He checked the revolver once, checked the sword, and then fixed his eyes on the ground and let the tracking take over. The wind cut from the northwest. The mud beside the trail held prints clearly in this kind of cold. He found her tracks within the first quarter mile, pressed deep at the toe, light at the heel, the gait of someone who had been running past exhaustion long before they reached his door. Meanwhile, at the river's edge, the general had pulled his beast to a stop and was reading the same ground with different eyes. The tracks were there. They curved east along the bank, not north the way a blind run would have gone. He crouched low in the saddle and studied the pattern, the spacing of the strides, the angle of each print. She hadn't been panicking, she had been thinking. "She split the trail deliberately," he said. His first scout came up alongside him. "Do we go back to the farmhouse?" The general was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the only sound was the river moving over rocks and the distant call of a crow somewhere in the grey sky. "Split up," he said. "You 2 go east toward the old grotto in the hillside. I go north and circle back." He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "She won't have gone far. She has children to get back to." The 2 scouts crossed the river without another word, their beasts pushing through the shallow water and climbing the far bank, moving toward the rock face where the hill rose steep and dark above the tree line. The general turned north and rode alone. Back on the near side of the river, Varric had already found the second set of prints near a tangle of exposed roots at the water's edge. Smaller steps now, irregular, the walk of someone who had stopped running and started moving carefully. He dismounted, looped the reins over a branch and continued on foot. The grotto entrance appeared in the hillside ahead of him, a narrow gap between two slabs of stone, dark inside, too dark to see past the first meter. He approached slowly, one hand loose at his side, making no effort to be quiet, because stealth would read as threat. He was 2 steps from the entrance when the darkness moved. The piece of wood caught nothing but air as he stepped sideways and grabbed both wrists, driving the attacker back against the stone with his full weight behind it. Emerald green skin, chest heaving, eyes that had been ready for something terrible and found something unexpected instead. "Easy," he said. "It's Varric. I have your boys." Naira's grip on the wood didn't release immediately. Her eyes moved across his face, searching for the lie in it. "Where are they?" she said. Not a question, a demand. "My neighbor has them. They're in the hiding place. They're safe. She knows what she's doing." He loosened his grip on her wrists, but didn't step back. "We need to leave right now. 2 scouts are coming this way." They could already hear them. The sound came from the direction of the river, heavy and rhythmic, the particular splash of large animals crossing moving water in a hurry. 150 meters, maybe 200. Closing fast. Varric pulled nearer out of the grotto mouth and around to where the horse stood waiting. She grabbed the saddle and swung up without being told. Moving with the efficiency of someone who had grown up around animals built for speed. He was up behind her a second later, and the horse was already turning, already moving, reading the urgency in the way he settled his weight. They pushed through the undergrowth at an angle, trying to put distance and tree cover between themselves and the sounds from the river. Branches dragged at them. The ground was soft and uneven, and the horse adjusted its stride constantly, ears forward, fully alert. They had not gone 100 meters. The scout came out of the trees to the left, dropping from a low branch directly into their path with a sound like a boulder hitting the ground. The horse screamed and reared, twisting sideways, and Varric felt the world tip. He grabbed for Naira, but the angle was wrong, and they came off together, hitting the mud hard, the impact driving the air out of his lungs in a single short burst. The revolver was gone. He didn't know where. He pushed himself up onto one knee and felt the sword handle under his right hand and drew it without thinking, coming to his feet just as the scout brought his machete around in a wide horizontal arc. Varric ducked under it, felt the displaced air across the back of his neck. The scout was enormous in the narrow space between the trees, filling the trail the way a wall fills a doorway. His bone-handled machete was as long as Varric's arm, the edge darkened from use and age. His feet were planted with the confidence of someone who had never needed to move backwards. "That orc is not your problem, human," he said. "She is now," Varric said. The scout moved first. The opening swing was brutal and fast, enough force behind it to take a branch clean off the birch to Varric's right. The second came lower and faster, and Varric caught it on his crossguard and let the force push him sideways rather than absorbing it straight, because absorbing that straight would have snapped his wrist. He moved with it, circling, keeping his feet under him, reading the rhythm, fast, powerful, but the same 3 moves cycling. The scout had spent his life winning before anyone figured out his pattern. Behind him, Naira moved through the brush on her hands and knees, pushing through wet leaves and roots, searching. Her fingers found cold metal in the mud near a root cluster, and she pulled the revolver free and stood. Varric found the opening on the 3rd cycle. He caught the machete high on his crossguard, redirected it left, stepped inside the arc, and drove his sword point into the outer face of the scout's left thigh, controlled, precise, deep enough to end the fight, not deep enough to end the man. The scout went down on one knee with a sound pulled from somewhere low in his chest. Varric stepped back and lowered the sword. "I don't want war with anyone," he said, his breathing rough. "I haven't wanted it for a long time. I'm not taking your life." He held the scout's eyes. "But you're not taking her." He sheathed the blade. He turned and found Naira standing at the edge of the trail, with the revolver raised. He shook his head once. Her arm came down slowly. They caught the horse, which had stopped 20 meters away and was standing still with its reins trailing, still shaking slightly from the rearing. Naira grabbed the saddle first this time. Varric was up behind her, and they rode. Behind them, the scout lay in the mud with one hand pressed to his thigh and the other reaching for the horn at his belt. He was breathing hard, and his leg was on fire, and there was a particular quality to his anger that came from recognition. He had seen that man before, that porch, that same still face looking down at them from the fence. He knew exactly where they were going. He raised the horn and blew. The sound rolled through the valley like a crack of thunder that didn't stop. Varric pressed his heels in, and the horse lengthened its stride, ears flat, running the way horses run when they understand that what's behind them is serious. He could feel Naira's grip tighten against his coat. Neither of them spoke. The trail opened up as they broke from the tree line, and the farmhouse came into view across the flat ground, the chimney still smoking, the fence gate standing open where he'd left it. He brought the horse through the gate and called Valora's name before they had fully stopped. She came around the side of the house with the two boys a step behind her, Gromac first and Drogal almost running to keep up. Naira was on the ground before the horse stopped moving. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and hit her knees in the mud and took both boys into her arms at once, pulling them in hard, her face buried in the space between their heads. Drogal made a small, surprised sound and then went still. Gromac put his arms around her neck and held on. Varric watched for a moment. Then he turned to Valora, who was already reading his expression. "Go home," he said quietly. "Lock your door." She left without asking what was coming. She already knew enough. Inside, Varric built the fire back up, while Naira settled the boys on the rug near the hearth with a blanket and 2 cups of water. Then she came and sat at the table across from him, and for the first time since she had appeared at his door that morning, she was completely still. She looked at her hands for a moment, then she looked at him. "My husband died in the 3rd year of the war," she said. Her voice was level, in the way that voices go level when there's been too much feeling for too long, and the only thing left is the fact itself. His name was Drac. He went out in the spring campaign and we got word in the autumn. She paused. The boys don't remember him. Gromac was 4. Drogal wasn't walking yet. Varric said nothing. He rested his arms on the table and let her speak. "After that, my father declared that the boys belonged to the clan, that Gromac was old enough to begin training, that Drogal would follow in a year." She looked at the fire. The flames moved in her eyes. "The treaty said we had a choice. It said that orcs who chose the peaceful life could have it. Plant, build, raise children away from the fighting." She looked back at him. "Your people signed that paper. My father never agreed to it. He thinks the peace is temporary, that another war is coming, and that when it comes, we need to be ready." "He might not be wrong about that," Varric said. "No," she said, "but he might be wrong about what it costs to prepare for it." She straightened in the chair. "I'm not sending my sons to become what killed their father. I won't do it." She looked at her hands again. "I can't put you in the middle of this. I should go out there and turn myself in, end this before it gets worse." Varric was quiet for a moment. "And the boys?" he said. "What happens to them if you do that?" She had no answer for that. The answer came instead from outside. The sound of hooves returning, harder and faster than before, stopping at the fence with a finality that pressed against the walls of the house. "Come out. The general's voice was clear and cold through the wood. "I know you're inside. Come out now, or we come in." Gromac looked up from the rug. Drogal pressed closer to his brother. Naira stood. She put her hand flat against Varric's chest as he reached for his revolver. "No," she said. "Step back. Let me do this." She walked to the door and opened it and stepped out onto the porch. Varric followed and stood 1 step behind her and to the right, hands visible, watching. 3 orcs waited at the fence. The general sat on his beast in the center, his expression the one he wore when outcomes were already decided. His 2 scouts flanked him, the wounded one on the left, his left thigh wrapped in a strip of dark cloth, the binding already showing a dark stain at the center. His jaw was set hard against the pain. He was sitting straight anyway. The general looked at Naira, then at Varric, then back at Nera with the careful attention of someone recalculating. "You have one chance," he said. "Come with us. The boys too. Your father is waiting." Nera walked to the edge of the porch and stopped there, her hands at her sides. "Azrog," she said. The name landed differently than anything else had. The general's expression shifted by almost nothing, a tightening around the eyes, the adjustment of a man who had been addressed as a soldier and has just been addressed as a person. "Don't," he said quietly. "You were at my wedding," she said. "You carried Drax's body home when the others couldn't. You sat with me through the first winter after." She let that stay in the air for a moment. "You know why I'm doing this." "I know why," he said. "It doesn't change my orders." "Then hear me out." She stepped down from the porch into the yard, closing the distance to the fence by half. "I am not going back. My sons are not going back. I watched my husband die for a war that solved nothing and broke everything it touched. The treaty exists. We both know what it says. I'm choosing the quiet life, and that is my right under the terms your lord and this man's people both signed." "Your father. My father wants soldiers," she said. "I want my sons to grow old. I want them to learn how to build things instead of how to destroy them. I want them to forget what a battlefield smells like." She held the general's eyes. "He has other grandchildren. He has warriors enough. He doesn't need these 2. The general said nothing. The scouts were still. Even the beasts had gone quiet. "Tell him I refused," Naira said. "Tell him I chose this life and I chose it fully." She turned and walked back to where Varric stood, and she put her arm around him and leaned into his side, in plain sight of all 3 orcs, unmistakable in its meaning. The general went very still. Among orcs, the law on this was ancient and absolute. A widow who publicly bound herself to a man outside the clan severed her blood tie. No patriarch's order could reach across that line, not even the orc lords. It was the one choice that could not be undone by anyone but the woman who made it. The general looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. "You know what you've just done," he said. "Tell him he won't see his grandchildren again," she said. "Tell him it was my choice, not his." The general held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he gave a single slow nod, the kind that acknowledges something without approving of it. He turned his beast north. The scouts followed. The wounded one went last, moving carefully in the saddle, not looking back. Varric stood beside Naira in the quiet they left behind. The gate swung slightly in the cold wind. The front door opened and Gromac and Drogal came out and crossed the yard and wrapped themselves around their mother without saying anything. 3 days. That was how long it took the general to reach the Orc Lord's camp in the north and deliver the message. He rode through the night on the 2nd day to make it before dawn, and he entered Gromash's tent alone, without being announced, which was the only way to have a conversation the guards wouldn't carry to other ears. Gromash was already awake. He was always awake before the camp stirred. He sat at the low table with a clay cup in one hand and his eyes on the entrance when Azrog came through it. The general told him everything. He left nothing out and added nothing. He said the words Naira had asked him to say, her exact words, in the order she had given them. When he finished, Gromash set the cup down on the table with a sound that was very controlled for how hard it landed. The silence in the tent lasted long enough that the 2 guards outside the entrance shifted their weight. Then Gromash stood. "Take me there," he said. They rode south with no escort. Just the two of them, the Orc Lord and his general, moving through the cold with the quiet economy of men who had ridden long distances together for decades. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, the 3 days had been quietly remarkable. Naira had moved through the house the first morning with the instincts of someone who had been managing a home for years and had simply been given a new one to manage. She relocated 3 things in the kitchen that had been in inefficient places for what appeared to be a very long time and didn't ask permission because it seemed obvious. Varric watched and said nothing, because she wasn't wrong. She brought herbs in from the small garden patch along the southern wall and hung them in the window to dry, and within a day the house smelled different, warmer, less like a place where a man had been alone for a long time. The boys found their rhythms with surprising speed. Gromac attached himself to Varric's morning routine from the second day, following at a respectful distance at first, and then gradually closing that distance as the mornings passed. He watched everything with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. He asked questions that made Varric pause before answering, not because they were difficult exactly, but because they were precise. Drogal worked without being asked. He would appear beside a task and simply begin it, carrying things that were too heavy for him without complaint, looking up afterward to see if anyone had noticed. Varric made a point of noticing. It seemed important. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Nera was at the well, the rope in both hands, pulling the bucket up through the cold water smell rising from the shaft when she stopped. 2 figures on the road, coming from the north, large and unhurried. She lowered the bucket back down slowly and straightened. Behind her, the farmhouse door opened. She heard Varric's footsteps on the porch boards, and then the particular sound of his hand finding the revolver at his belt. The small metallic whisper of it shifting in the holster. She reached back without turning around and touched his wrist. "No," she said. Her voice was steady. "This is mine to handle." She walked to the fence. Gromash dismounted with the unhurried authority of a man who had never needed to arrive anywhere quickly because the world had always waited for him. He was taller than the general by half a head, older by 20 years, his scarred green skin the colour of deep moss in shadow, his white braids tied back with a cord of dark leather. He stopped 2 paces from his daughter and looked at her the way a man looks at something he built with great care and has found standing in a place he didn't put it. "I came to see for myself," he said. His voice was not raised. It had never needed to be. "Yes," Naira said. "It's true." Gromash looked past his daughter at the house. He looked at it for a long time, taking inventory without appearing to. The herbs drying in the window. The 2 pairs of small boots lined up beside the door, one pair slightly larger than the other. The neat line of the fence where it had been recently repaired. Varric standing in the doorway, still and watchful, hands visible. And behind Varric, half hidden in shadow, his grandsons, staring at him with wide, dark eyes and not moving. Gromash looked at the boys for a long moment. Then he turned back to Naira. "You are exiled," he said. Each word was placed with the weight of something that could not be unmade. "You may not return to the clan lands. You may not speak in the clan's name. Your sons carry no clan name from this day forward." Naira held his gaze. "I know. I hope what you have chosen is worth what it costs you." "It already is," she said. Gromash studied her face for one more moment, the face of his daughter, which he had known since before it had its current shape. Whatever he found there or didn't find, he said nothing more. He turned and walked back to his beast with the same unhurried authority with which he had arrived. The general mounted beside him. They turned north. Naira stood at the fence and watched them go until the road bent and the trees took them, and there was nothing left to see. She stood a little while longer after that, because she needed the time. The sound of hooves faded slowly, then all the way, and the valley went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet after something large has passed through it. Varric came and stood beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder or offer the kind of words that people offer when they don't know what else to do. He simply stood there in the cold with her and let the silence be what it was. From behind them, a small voice, Gromack in the doorway. "Mama, where did he go?" She turned and looked at her son, standing in the frame of a door that was theirs now, in a house that was theirs now, on land where her boys would not be shaped into weapons. "Inside," she said. "Come help me with supper." The days that came after moved differently from any days she had known before. Slower at first, with a careful quality to them, as if the four of them were learning a new language together, then gradually steadier, more sure-footed, settling into a rhythm that felt increasingly like it had always been there, waiting for them to step into it. Varric taught the boys to read the sky before a front came in, to look at the colour of the western horizon at dusk and understand what it was saying. He showed them how the mud on the north side of the tree roots dries differently than the south side, and what that meant about where the water was moving underground. Things that had no application in war, things that were only useful in a life that intended to stay somewhere. Gromack absorbed it all the first time and came back with questions on the second. Drogal learned more slowly, but retained it more completely. The way some foundations take longer to set and hold more weight when they do. Nera expanded the herb garden along the south wall until it was 3 times its original size. She knew plants that Varric had never heard of, and she taught him their names in both languages, the Orc names first and the common tongue names after, and he wrote some of them down in the margin of the old ledger he kept for the farm. 20 days after Gromash had ridden north for the last time, they were sitting at the table for the evening meal when Gromack, without any particular reason, did something with a piece of bread that made Drogal laugh. A real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that belongs only to children because adults learn to hold them back. The sound filled the room completely. Varric and Nera both went quiet at the same moment. They looked at each other across the table. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. That night, after the boys had gone to sleep, they sat on the porch steps the way they had started doing without deciding to, somewhere in the second week. The lamp behind them threw a soft gold shape across the boards. Somewhere out in the dark, an owl called once, and then was still. The moon hung full and clear over the valley, laying a silver road across the field that ran from the porch to the tree line. Varric looked out at the field for a while. Then he turned to her. "You're going to stay, aren't you?" he said. Nera looked at him. The moonlight found her face and the dark of her eyes, and the particular expression of someone who has already answered a question inside themselves and is only just now finding the words for it. "Do you want me to?" she said. "Yes," he said. No hesitation, no qualification, just the word, given directly. She leaned sideways until her shoulder came to rest against his. His arm lifted slowly and settled around her, and they stayed like that, looking out at the field where their life was already growing in ways neither of them had planned or predicted or dared to expect. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves. It was quieter, harder in certain moments, more honest than most things either of them had known. It had started with a stranger's knock and a desperate pair of eyes and 2 small boys pressed into arms that didn't know them, and it had become something that now had weight and shape and the particular warmth of things that are real. In the morning, Gromack would be at the fence before sunrise, checking the animals the way Varric had shown him. Drogal would follow with his boots on the wrong feet, carrying a bucket too large for him without complaint, watching to see if anyone noticed. The herb garden along the south wall was already showing new growth through the cold soil. The fence on the east side still needed mending. There was always more to do. That was the nature of a life that was actually being lived. But right now, there was only the moon and the field, and the warmth of 2 people sitting where everything had begun, in the quiet of something that had stopped being temporary so gradually that neither of them had noticed exactly when it became permanent. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.